Alrighty, so b'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to begin this week's Inner Dimension shiur. I want to welcome each and every one of you and thank each and every one of you for joining and for taking time off from a very, very busy schedule, I'm sure, on a Wednesday. Some of us are driving, some of us are, who knows what we're doing. So it's very, very special that you'll join me from wherever you are, v'lechtecha v'derech, kipshutai. And it's just so amazing to see all of these chaverim, makshivim from all around the world joining together as one, b'siyata d'shmaya, to learn the words of the tzaddikim. There's nothing more beautiful. And like I say often, I think one of the most powerful defense claims and advocacies on behalf of our generation is this that we say on Monday and Thursday, Uvechol zois shimcha lo shachachnu. This that we're able to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu that after everything that we've been through, as a Jewish nation, and each of us individually in our own lives, Shimcha lo shachachnu, we haven't forgotten you, and we're continuing to try valiantly and to strive, each of us in our own life, no matter what happened yesterday, and no matter what our week has looked like until this point, and no matter how it will look like going forward, Be'ez Hashem, we should have an elevated end of the week. But this azus to kedusha, this holy stubbornness, to be able to say that as it is, and as I am going to go ahead and take an hour off to be able to learn b'siyata d'shmaya with chaverim, makshivim, and all with Hashem's help, to be able to learn the teachings of the tzaddikim, ze mashu miyuchad, and it's something special, and it just stands as a chus for each and every one of us and all of our families, b'siyata d'shmaya. And I just want to thank the sponsor for tonight's shiur, for today's shiur, depending on where you are. And this year is dedicated, now I'm forgetting if it was Le'ilu Nishmas. Yes, Le'ilu Nishmas Rachel Leah Bas Liba Kindle. I think that's Kindle. And the Neshama should have an aliyah in the schus of the Torah that we're going to learn today. Okay, so Be'ezer Hashem, I'm going to share my screen. And in this shiur, we're going to be learning a little bit of a more complex and somewhat difficult teaching from the Maggid of Mezritcher. And Ami, Heiliga Ami, if I can get a thumbs up. If you can see it, yeah, we're good? Okay. So we're going to be learning a teaching from the Maggid of Mezritcher, who famously was the primary disciple and student of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. And b'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to try to delve into it. It's a little bit long and it's a little bit involved, but I think that there are so many very, very powerful foundations of Chassidus in this piece that I think it's very important to delve inside and to really learn it. And I think also that we should enter into this piece with the realization that this is an excellent example, and we did a little bit of this last week also, but this is an excellent example of how the tzaddikim took psukim and took ideas in the Torah and in Chazal and in Midrashim and the Gemara, and with a little bit of a shinoi, with a little bit of a change, with a little bit of a hashkafic detour, or perhaps a different approach, change it entirely so that we can never see that pasuk again in the same way. And the more a person learns Chassidus, and the more a person is studying the teachings of the tzaddikim, not all of which have pshatim and have Torahs on each and every pasuk in the Torah, but when you see the diverse spectrum of all the different tzaddikim, so anytime that you're doing Shnayim Mikra, or anytime that you hear somebody say a pasuk or a Rav speaking about something, you're already able to approach it with a completely different perspective and approach. And so we're going to taste a little bit of that tonight with Hashem's help, all b'siyata d'shmaya and the schus of the tzaddikim, schusem yagen aleinu. So let's begin. The Medrash says, Avram zakein bayamim. In this week's parsha, Avram grows old. Zakein bayamim. Says the Medrash, Hadahu d'chsiv ateres tiferes. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that tells us that ateres tiferes seba. I'm forgetting the exact lashon, but it says that seba, that old age, is considered an ateres tiferes, like a crown. And obviously, I think on a simple level, there is a correlation between that which is on top of one's head, which in a majestic sense is the crown, but in each and every one of our sense, that's the hair on our head, and old age, because that's how Kadosh Baruch Hu put it in the teva, put it in the nature of mankind. We'll describe a little bit and explain the sod of this as we go along, but Kadosh Baruch Hu made it that as a person gets older, and we should all remain young at heart forever, and I'm sure we all are, but as we grow older, so the hair on the top of our head is growing white. And so the pasuk here is actually referring to this aspect in which the hair on top of one's head grows white as a person gets older. And the pasuk says, Ateres tiferes seba. This old age that manifests in the hair on top of one's head is like a crown. Ateres tiferes. It's a beautiful, glorious crown. B'derech tzedakah timtza. And where does a person find this crown? B'derech tzedakah. Through a path of righteousness. What does this mean? Says the Maggid, or rather the Medrash continues, because it says about Avram, that Avram, leman yitzave v'goymer v'shamru derech Hashem lasis tzedakah, that Avram Avinu was going ahead and charged with directing and instructing his children after him to follow in his path, and his path kiyadua was the midah of chesed, and therefore it was Avram Avinu, and we'll talk about the color white hopefully at the end, but it was Avram Avinu who is zoche to this aspect of Avram zakein, that Avram tapped into this glorious, beautiful phase of life where a person is crowned with that white hair on the top of one's head because Avram Avinu was connected with the midah of chesed, and that's referred to in the pasuk that says b'derech tzedakah timatzeh, that one who is engaged with the path of tzedakah, with the path of chesed, will at the end of life be able, even on a simple level, to look back over one's life, and that white hair on the head is not a busha, it's not a bizayon, because you came to this place in life and what did you accomplish, but on the contrary, it's a ateres tiferes. We wear it like a badge of honor, and we go out into the street, right? Though the women are covering their hair, but for the men, al kapanim, to go out into the street and to say, this is the phase and the stage of life that I am, and I don't regret 1 minute of the time that led me until this place, because biderech tzedakah timatzeh, because a person who lives like Avram Avinu, and a person who's living with the other focus and the consciousness of how I can help others, how I can make the world a brighter place. So eventually, when we come to that place in life, that's the place of ateres tiferes seba. It's going to be a glorious crown on top of the head, and not the opposite. And that's why the Medrash is referring to this pasuk about Avram dafka, because Avram was the midah of chesed, and chesed is associated, as we'll learn, with tzedakah, and therefore it was Avram who was zakein, that Avram attained this beauty, this ateres tiferes, this crown that the Medrash associates with Avram Avinu. That's the simple understanding. Lakach nemar va'Avram zakein bayamim. That's what the Medrash says. Okay, that's a simple understanding of the Medrash. And the Medrash continues. Not only this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed Avram Avinu, because the end of the pasuk says, "Va'Avram zakein bayamim, va'Hashem beirach es Avraham bakol." And HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed Avram with everything. Shenemar va'Hashem beirach es Avram bakol. That's the Medrash, and here the Maggid is going to take us not just below the surface, but deep, deep below the surface, mamish, to the core, to the panemius, to the inner dimension. And what a privilege it is to learn these teachings with you today. Says the Maggid, it's possible to begin opening up this lengthy and involved discourse, but with Siyata D'Shmaya we'll be able to learn it properly, with Hashem's help, and in the merit of all the neshamas that are gathering together at this time from all over the world to connect with us and with the teachings of the tzaddik. The Chazal and the Medrash and the Gemara ultimately says on this word bihibaram that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eila told Shmayim ba'aretz bihibaram, the pasuk in Bereshis that says these are the chronicles of heaven and earth bihibaram, when He created them. What do Chazal say? Al tikri bihibaram Ella be'Avraham. This word bihibaram, which means when He created them, which is a reference to the Shemayim and Aretz, the heaven and earth, referred to in the beginning of the pasuk. Say Chazal, don't read it bihibaram, when He created them, but rather switch around the letters, and you should read it be'Avraham. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, told us Shemayim and Aretz be'Avraham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created it with Avraham. Now, what does this mean on a simple level? On a simple level, this is connected to the pasuk that says Olam Chesed Yibane, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world based on a premise of kindness. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to do good with mankind. And we don't have to go through the whole. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the derech of the Ramchal, that Teva Hatov Lehetiv. It is the nature of that which is good to bestow good upon others. And what's the ultimate good? Not when we just shower one with free gifts, but like the Rambam says, the highest level of tzedakah is to give someone a job, right? Because then there's no nahama de kisufa, there's no embarrassment, and that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world in such a way that we should be able to live under the illusion, al kapanim, its reality from our perspective, of bechira, so that we should be able to choose the right thing, so that ultimately we're going to earn that reward and enjoy it having become ours, us, in the process having been likened to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who owns all that is good, right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of all good, and in that way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing good and revealing that essence of goodness with mankind. And that really was the premise and the ultimate purpose for creation. And so that's pshat in that pasuk, Olam Chesed Yibane, that the world was created based on a foundation of Chesed. And this Maimer Chazal is another manifestation or expression of that, when Chazal tell us, don't say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world bihi baram, rather be'Avraham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world with Avraham, who is Midas HaChesed. That's on a simple level. A level deeper is al tikri bihi baram elaba Avraham, and this is the level that the Maggid of Mezritcher is about to ask a question based on this mahalech, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world not just with a midah of chesed that is associated with Avraham, but rather be'Avraham seems like in the merit of Avraham himself, as Avraham was, as he existed, not just as persona, but as person. Al tikri bihi baram ella be'Avraham. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in the merit of Avram. Yesh l'daktik, says the Chayei Maggid, im nemar shebeschus Avram nivra ha'olam. If we're understanding this Maimer Chazal correctly, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in the merit of this figure, in the merit of this of this tzaddik yesod olam Avram Avinu, im kain hey chaya kiyim la'olam kaidim leidas Avram. How is it possible that the world was functioning, that the world was created and existing on its own independently before the birth of Avraham, that Avram was only born 10 generations, like the Medrash tells us. 20 generations rather, after the creation of the world. So if the world was created in the merit of Avram Avinu, so then what was keeping the world going until Avram Avinu came to the fore and until he was born into the world and was able to reach those lofty levels of founding monotheism and being this Avram Avinu that he's called Ha'ivri because he stood on one side and the rest of the world was on the other side, and he introduced them to the sweetness of understanding that all the multiplicity and all the disparity in this world really is rooted in the Echad Yachad Miyuchad. How did the world exist? That's the Maggid's question. Keep that in the back of your mind. We'll get back to it. But here the Maggid sort of launches onto like a slight detour, which is going to take some time and effort to explain all B'siyata D'Shmaya. V'yuvan al pi mashakasav razal al pasag vayitein loy meiser mikol. Says the Maggid, let's begin to understand this and begin to lay the foundation for an answer based on another chazal that says that when the pasuk tells us that Avram Avinu, or rather, just to translate the word, shaham meiser nasan, right, or rather vayitin loy meiser mikol, that Avram Avinu gave meiser from everything that was given to him. This is a reference to in parshas Lech Lecha, after the battle between the 4 kings and the 3 kings, or rather the 4 kings and the 5 kings. Ultimately, Avram is able to go ahead and to conquer and to take a tremendous amount of spoils. And the pasuk tells us, I'm just going to read you the full pasuk inside in the context. Malki Tzedek Melech Shalim. There was a person called Malki Tzedek who was the king of a place called Shalim. He was this high priest to Kel Elyon, which is a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Ramban tells us, what does that mean? He was a priest, he was a Kohen, there was no Kahuna, there was no Levium, there was no Yisraelim. What does it mean that Malki Tzedek was a priest? He says, Klape, in relation to the rest of the world that was serving idols, so Malki Tzedek was naturally assumed that position of the Kohen Gadol, being a very unique and singular figure in that time in a spiritual sense. And what does it say? Ubarach El Elyon Asher Magin Tzarecha Biyadecha. He came to Avram Avinu, or rather a pasuk before by Yavarcheg, when he blessed Avram. And he said, Baruch Avram Kel Elyon. Blessed is Avram to the High Lord. Kaina Shemayim Ba'aretz. He who heaven and earth belong to him. Ubaruch El Elyon Asher Migin Sarecha Biyadecha B'itin Lo Meiser Mikol. And blessed are you that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave all of your enemies into your hands and that he protected you from them. And then the pasuk very enigmatically says, and he gave 1/10 Mikol, from everything. Now, what does this mean? Who gave 1/10? We don't know in the pasuk. It's unclear who is giving this meiser. On a simple level, it would make sense that Malki Tzedek was the one, because we're referring to this king Malki Tzedek, and it says that Malki Tzedek was giving him this whole bracha, and then Vayitin. Now, who's Vayitin going on? Who was the last subject that was mentioned in the pasuk? Malki Tzedek, not Avram. Simple level is that Malki Tzedek gave meiser. But he says, and we're going to read it inside, the Maggid says it doesn't seem to make sense. Why should a king be giving? Why should a priest rather? Why should a kohen be giving meiser? We give meiser to the king. We give 1/10 of our produce to the kohen rather, not the king. He's called melech, and that's why I keep on mixing it up. But we give meiser to the kohen. The kohen doesn't give meiser to us. So what's going on here? And he says, Chazal say Meiser Nasin Avram Lisham, that really Avram was the one who was giving Meiser. And even though on a simple level of understanding the pasuk, it's referring to Melchizedek, Chazal tell us no, it was Avram Avinu that gave Meiser from whatever he had to Melchizedek. Now I'll just let you in on a little secret. Chazal also tell us, as a Targum Yerushalmi, that this Melchizedek was actually Shem ben Noach. We refer to him here with a different name, Melchizedek, but ultimately Melchizedek is a code word for Shem ben Noach, this unbelievable tzaddik Shem, who was a son of Noach, that ultimately Yaakov Avinu generations later is going to be learning in the yeshiva of Shem be'ever. This is Shem ben Noach. Says the Maggid, we understand that we need to suggest that it was Avram Avinu that was giving Meiser to the Kohen, as opposed to the other way around. But at the end of the day, says the Maggid, the pasuk does not seem to say that. Right? The pasuk seems to suggest in a simple grammatical reading that it was Melchizedek, it was Shem that gave Meiser, and not the other way around. So yes, we believe that what Chazal tell us is what transpired, but we also need to understand but we also have to understand that there must be, that the Torah is hinting to us an exchange in the opposite direction. That Melchizedek was giving Avram Avinu something, and what was that something that Avram Avinu was receiving from Melchizedek at the same time that he was giving him a tenth from what he had physically? What did he receive from Melchizedek in return? That it was Shem, which is Melchizedek, who was the one giving the Meiser. Like we explained, that's the Pashup shot on the Pasuk. Right, or rather, and he was the one who brought all of this food and all of this wine, this bread and this wine. Like we said, it seems to be referring to Melchizedek, to Shem. So what is it? What is this Meiser? What is this tenth that Shem is going ahead and giving to Avram Avinu, that the Kohen is going and bestowing upon Avram? If we're going to understand based on what Chazal tell us, then it makes sense. That it was Avram Avinu who was giving a tenth from all of the spoils that he had taken from winning the war, because Melchizedek is the Kohen, he's referred to in the pasuk as the Kohen, and so he deserves the Meiser. What does this mean? This lashon in the pasuk that Shem was the one who was giving Vayitin loy Meiser mikol, that he gave him a tenth mikol from everything. What does that mean? So here the Maggid says, and please forgive the underlining and the highlights, I couldn't find this online, so this is my own sefer. Here the Maggid explains mamish the deepest depths of what's going on here in this pasuk b'derech remes. The Efshar Loymar, says the Maggid, it's possible to say Kikfar be'arnu, we already explained elsewhere, inyan haisafas ois hey. Everybody knows that Chazal tell us that Avram ein noy moilid. Avram, as he was with the name Avram, was not able to give birth. Sarai, with the letter Yud in her name, was not able to give birth. But Avraham hoilid, Sarah hoilid. It was when Avram had a letter added to his name, that letter Hey, that enabled Avram Avinu to bring children into the world. And Sarai, in the same way, needed to have that Yud changed to a Hey, and then she was able to bring children into the world together with Avraham. And so this Hey that was added onto Avram and Sarah's name enabled them to go ahead and to have children. The Maggid, in a different place earlier on in his Perush al Torah, explains the depth. And the Maggid tells us, the pasuk says, and this is outside, and then we'll see what he says inside, Ki b'ka Hashem sur eilamim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth with the name Ka. Ki b'ka Hashem sur eilamim. What does that mean? Say Chazal, what does it mean that God created the world with the letter, or with the name rather, Yud Ke Ka? Say Chazal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Olam Haba with a Yud, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Olam Hazeh with the letter Hey. And Chazal elsewhere darshan that because this world was created with the letter Hey in its very form expresses a very deep process that takes place in the world, wherein those that are wicked fall out of the bottom of the Hey, that is a big open space, and in order to return, it's not that easy just to go back into the place where they came from, but they have to climb all the way up to the top of the Hey and enter into the small little space in between. Chazal darshan, based on the Hey that this world was created with, Ki b'ka Hashem surei lam, and the Yud is talking about the spiritual realm of Olam Haba, and the Hey is referring to this world. Says the Maggid elsewhere in a different parsha The Maggid explains that Sarai had the letter Yud in her name, but not the letter Hey. Says the Heilige Maggid, what does this mean? V'hanefesh asher asu b'charan. That the pasuk tells us long before Avram Avinu and Yitzchak and Sarah rather Imenu brought Yitzchak and brought Yitzchak into the world. Long before that, the pasuk tells us that they created a nefesh. V'hanefesh asher asu b'charan. What was that? What was that soul that they created in Charan long before they had an actual physical child? Say Chazal, it's talking about Gerim. That Avram Avinu was osik in this, that he drew forth or he drew close so many people who were very distant from believing in one God. They served all the idols of the world, and Avram Avinu made them into Gerim, and in that way he was moled. In that way he gave birth in a certain spiritual sense to these nefashos. Says the Maggid, you know why? Because Sarai wasn't Sarah yet. And that Yud was associated with Olam Haba. So they were able to have Olam Haba dika children. They were able to bring spiritual progeny into the world because Sarai had the letter Yud that was associated with Olam Haba. And that's why they were able to make souls, but only spiritual souls, only spiritual children. But when finally that Yud is swapped out for a Hey, which is relating to this world, that this physical world was created with the letter Hey, Memela, then they're able to have a child in a physical sense as well. That's what the Maggid says over there. As he discusses and unfolds and opens up that piece in that drasha, the Maggid explains that this Hey that is added onto Avram and Sarai's name is associated with the Hey Motsaos Hapeh, with the 5 different components of speech, different places from which sounds that are ultimately formed into letters, words, paragraphs, and speeches, right, are created. And those 5 sounds, without going through all of them now, but there's a category of lip letters that's called bumf, which is the bays and the mem and the pei, all of which you need the lips to be able to articulate. There are the palate letters, there are the tongue letters, there are the throat letters, ches and hey, for example. And all together, we can take the 22 letters of the aleph bays and we can split it into 5 categories of sounds that phonetically, when a person is utilizing all 5 of those components of speech, which are called motsaos hapeh, expressive categories in speech, that forms all of the words that we need to be able to speak in the Hebrew language. These Hey Motsaos Hapeh. What's the Hey Motsaos Hapeh? What's the inyan? This also speaks to why it was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world with the letter Hey. Because how did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create this world? By speaking it into being. What is speech? We've mentioned this many times before, and it's a foundational idea. Speech is the inyan of tzimtzum. Speech is the inyan of constriction. Speech is the inyan of quantification and qualification as opposed to the voice. The voice is infinite. Voice, as it's sung, for example, in a Hasidic melody, in a nigun where there's no words, it's infinite. Why? Because that voice, as it's coming out, can potentially become every possible word in every possible language. As it comes out just as kol itself, the kol shofar is very related to this, as we said in a recent shiur, Rosh Hashanah time. The voice itself is on the level of infinity. It's the speech that takes that measure of voice that's coming up from the vocal cords, from the lungs, that's being breathed in and breathed out through the vocal cords to become voice, and it is the 5 motsaos hapeh. It is these 5 areas of the mouth that go ahead and define what that voice is, so that once I speak a word, it can only be that word and it can no longer be anything else. And it can only have that mashma'ut and that meaning. And that is exactly the process that HaKadosh Baruch Hu underwent when he went ahead and spoke the world into being. Because the world as we know it is really rooted in this place of infinity. Is really rooted in this place of the Ein Sof, of the infinite reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. So how does that go ahead and manifest in a world of limit? How does that manifest in a world of Elokim, Vayomer Elokim, Ugvuras Yidaberu, Gvura is related to Dibor, the Shem Elokim is the Shem of Gvura. All of these concepts are intertwined and connected. How do we get to a physical world where a person is only this high and not infinitely high? And when the sun rises at a specific time and sets at a specific time, and the answer is through the medium of speech. Speech, in its deepest form, is a tool that is able to take infinity and transform it into finitude. That's what speech is. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks the world into being. Says the Maggid, the hay that is added onto Avram's name is this hay from the 5 Motzaos HaPeh, which is again why this world is created with the letter hay. That's what it means. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke the world into being so that it went from being infinite potential godliness to a very defined and specific system of nature that HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifested into this creation that we're all living within. Says the Heilige Maggid, that's the hay that's added onto Avram's name. Because guess what? Before Avram had this hay from the hay Motzaos HaPeh added and embedded into his name, he was creating in an infinite way, but not in a way that could become defined and released and manifest in a physical reality. Much like if HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence existed before the creation of the world, is it not manifesting? Oh, you better believe it's manifesting infinitely, but it doesn't come across to this side of the matrix, right? Through this side of the encoding process to actually become something physical in this world. And so it was only when this hay of the hay Motzaos HaPeh are added on, or is added on to Avram Avinu's name, that Avram is then able to go ahead and to have a child into this physical world. So he says, it's related to these 5 categories, 5 areas within the mouth, these 5 modes of phonetic speech. The Efshar Loimar Gam Kinchizeo pairs. Listen to this. Listen to this. Unbelievable depth. This changes the whole thing. Listen to this. What was the pasuk that we're having difficulty with? The pasuk that we're having difficulty with is referring to Malki Tzedek, at least on a Pashup Shat, who's giving Meiser, who's giving a 10th to Avram Avinu. Now we're wondering, why should Malki Tzedek be giving a 10th to Avram Avinu? Chazal tell us it's the other way around. Avram gives a 10th to Malki Tzedek, who's the Kohen, who deserves Meiser. Says the Maggid, you know what it means that he gave him Meiser Mikol? That he gave him a 10th from everything he had? What it means is that it is in this moment, and it's so obscure, unless the Maggid comes and opens our eyes so we see it, we'll never see this in a million years. It is in this moment that Avram Avinu gets the hay added onto his name, that he gets the hay embedded onto his name. How do we see this? Because the letter hay, which is numerically equivalent to 5, is Meiser Mikol, is a 10th from the numeric value of the word kol, which is 50. A 10th of 50 is 5. Says the Maggid, that's what Malki Tzedek gave to Avram Avinu. Unbelievable pella. Meiser Mikol. He gave him a 10th of the numerical value of the word kol, which is 50. Malki Tzedek is giving Avram Avinu this hey Motzaos HaPeh, this ability to express and to manifest an actual being into this world physically, to have a child, Yitzchak Avinu. Ki kol gematria nun. The word kol is numerically equivalent to 50. The hey hu meiser min chamishin. A 10th of 50 is 5. What's this 5? This is the hay that was added onto Avram's name to go ahead and to enable him to manifest that midah of chesed, but in a way that it could be born into the world in a limited sort of aspect. And was there anything more limited than Yitzchak Avinu, midas hagvura, that came about because of Avram's bechina of ugvurascha yidaberu, the ability to speak, the ability to manifest, to take infinite voice, hakol kol Yaakov, and to go ahead and bring it into the bechina of ugvurascha yidaberu, which ultimately manifested in Yitzchak Avinu, who is the absolute paradigm and symbol of Midas HaGevurah. And that's what Malki Tzedek is giving to Avram Avinu. And I highlighted this for a reason. Listen to this. And this ultimately, this secret of the Hey Motzaos HaPeh, of what it means that God spoke creation into being, is the Iker Kiyam Ha'olam, is the primary mode in which the world is sustained. The Ikra Avodas Hashem Yisbarach, and says the Maggid, and when the Maggid tells you this is the foundation of Avodas Hashem, we have to open our ears, right? The Ikra Avodas Hashem Yisbarach is Lahalos Hadiburim V'Ha'oisiyos El HaKdusha. To be able to look around and to see the limitation of Hashem's dibur manifest in the midah of gevura, it manifests in the name Elokim, as the pasuk says, Vayomer Elokim Yihir, Vayomer Elokim Yihir Rakia. It's all through the midah of Elokim. Elokim has 5 letters, each of which is associated with one of the Hey Motzaos HaPeh. To be able to look at nature, that's Gematria HaTeva, which is the same numerical value of the name Elokim, and to be able to realize that this is only the end process of something that's rooted in the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is that infinite spirituality, that infinite source from which everything that we perceive to be so limited and sometimes so limiting and sometimes so constricted, we have to be able to look at the letters of existence that surround us and trace them back to their source, back to the nigun, the wordless melody from which all of creation emerges. That's the ikar of Avodas Hashem in every conversation and in everything that we learn and in every person that we see and in every experience that we have and every circumstance that we go through. To be able to trace those letters, that constriction, back into the Shem Elokim, which is ultimately Kishemesh Umagin Hashem Elokim. The word Elokim is only the facade, so to speak, or the shield for the name Yud Kei Vav Kei that's associated with Kol, HaKol Kol Yaakov, the Bechina of Tiferes, as opposed to the Bechina of Malchus, without getting into the technical details now, but to be able to trace everything back up into that Bechina of Kol, of infinite spirituality, and to find that throughout the world. That's the ikar of Hasidic philosophy, and that, says the Maggid, is the primary foundation of our Avodas Hashem, and everything that we do, b'chol drachecha da'ehu, to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu everywhere, and to be able to go past those constricted letters and the facts of nature, and to realize that Hateva, Gematria, Elokim, is really bringing us back, up and out, into that infinite spirituality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's essence. Okay, now that we know about that, let's go back into this Bechina of Bihibaram and our question with which we began of how is it that the world was sustained before Avram Avinu was brought into the world? Like we began that question that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world Bihibaram Avraham. So what does this mean? That the world is existing and functioning before Avram Avinu is actually born into the world. Listen to what he says. It's known, one of the foundational ideas of Pnimis Torah is that the Avos HaKadoshim were far more than simply people, historical figures, but they were paradigms, right? They were personas. When we think about Avram Avinu, we think about the sphere of Chesed. When we think about Yitzchak Avinu, we think about the sphere of Gevurah, and Yaakov is Tiferet, and Netzach Vayid is Moshe and Aaron, and Yisod is Yosef Atzadik, and Malchus is David, and every action that they take is symbolic of bringing us back into the midos that they represent, so that when David moves his hand or takes an action, that tells us that in a certain level, this action and this bechina on a metaphoric level is found by the midah of Malchus. And that when Avram goes ahead and does something, and Avram is involved in an endeavor, that tells us that the midah of Chesed has such an hug as well. It's all the remez, that's underneath the curtain. And the pasuk says, Chesed la Avram, that Avram Avinu is associated with the meaning of Chesed. And also the pasuk says, Zera Avraham Oihavai, this progeny, these descendants of Avram Avinu Oihavai, who is my beloved. Ava is always associated with the meaning of Chesed. Okay. But we know that Avram Avinu, by the Akedah and other places, is called Avraham. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls out to him from Shemayim with what word? Avram, say Chazal on the place. Rashi brings down, it's a lashon of chiba, to be able to call somebody a double name and to repeat that name and so to speak verbally to caress the name, right? To be able to say it twice because you love it so much and the person who is encapsulated within the name is so beloved to you. Avram, Kefil Shmai. That's on a simple level. What's the depth of this, that Avraham is called Avraham? Says the Maggid. Ki be'emes yesh beis gevonei Avraham. There are two aspects of Avram Avinu. Ha'alif hu Avram ha'tachton asher haya ba'olam hazeh. The first one is Avram as a physical being, having gone through his own process, right? Being spoke into existence from Terach, his father, that ultimately the Kedushas Levi in an unbelievable Torah that Beis Hashem will try to learn next year, Siyata Deshmaya, hopefully in person, hopefully here in Yerushalayim, without this a very awkward sort of experience of having to talk in such a way, but to sit in person, there's nothing like it, and I miss it terribly. But the Kedushas Levi says that ultimately it wasn't Terach that gave birth to Avram, it was Am Yisrael that gave birth to Avram. Without getting into the details now. But ultimately Avram Avinu was born into this world, that Avram goes through that Bechin of and that's the aspect of the Avram Avinu that we refer to in the Chumash, that he exists as a person in this world, historical figure. But the truth is is that there's another aspect of Avram that's always encapsulated within the historical person of Avram Avinu. And he says, Hu Avram Amiti. And that's the true Avraham. But Olam Ha'elyon, the root of this tzaddik, the light which is shining through that stained glass window that then becomes the midah of chesed as it refracts and as it reflects through Avram Avinu's person, through his actions down in this world. But what's the shorish of that R? What's the shorish of that light? Where does it come from in the spiritual world? That's the true Avram. Avram Amiti. Because there's a spiritual midah above that's also called by this name Avram, or Tzelemar Tziruf Avraham Hema Shirish Lamidas Chesed Va'ava. That there's a place in the spiritual supernal realms. There's an aspect of through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals Himself, which is the midah of Chesed and the midah of Ava, and the midah of unbridled and unlimited Chesed and Hashpa and desire to give, which is also called Avram. Because Avram Avinu, with his actions down in this world, the lower Avram, was misnai bechasidus kol yamav, that he spent his whole life running after guests, even lowly people, like he made them wash their feet off from avodah zarah, lowly people, but he opened up his tent, and not only did he wait for people to come to him, but on the most painful day after his bris, he goes out and he goes seeking them. Avram Avinu down here made himself into a vessel for the Avram Ha'elyon. He drew down onto him this midah of Avram Elyon. The Efsher Shazel Sharamzer Azal Mishenichbol Shemoy the Yadusha Ba'elam Azel Ba'elam Abba. Chazal tell us in the Medrash that any time that you see a person referred to by both names, Avram, or by a double name, it means that we're referring to him in this world and in Olam Haba. And that means that Olam Haba is the spiritual world above, the world of the letter Yud. And that means that in that place, in that supernal realm, there's a midah of Avram. And that's why we refer to Avram. We're referring and we're addressing both the Avram Amiti in the upper realm and the Avram Avinu as manifest in a person in this world. Listen to this. Even in this generation, or rather, we skipped a few words. Ramzu ala nizkar sheyu shema elyon v'atachton, that there's two different names, a name above and a name below. And listen to what he says. Va'afilu b'daras halalu, in our generation, im adam midasei chesed, if we'll go ahead and try to live a life of chesed, to think about others, to think about how we can make the world a brighter place, to do chesed kipshutai, to get involved in chesed things, and to be always looking for an opportunity to give tzedakah and to support and to look for good causes to support and so on. Umizgaber Taman Amida Azais Nikra Shemoy Avram. He also, in a certain way, or she, is called Avraham as well, Al Shema Elyon, because we also made ourselves into a vessel for this lofty aspect of Avram Avinu, the realm above, and all the different midas, the midah of Gevura, when used and harnessed properly, the midah of Tiferes, the midah of Netzach and Hod, and so on. We become vessels for the name of the Av, or for the name of one of the seven shepherds that is representative or emblematic of this midah. Nimsa. So based on this understanding that when we refer to Avram, we're not simply referring to Avram Hatachton as he existed and was born historically on a certain date before which he was not in this world and after he died and he left the world. No, Mashikosav Behibaram Avraham. This that Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world with Avraham doesn't mean the Avraham in this world. Ritzaloimer Ba'Avram Elyon. It's talking about that higher aspect of Avram. Shabazu Hamida Nivra Olam, that the world was created with this midah. Shenemar, like we said and we began to describe in the beginning, Olam Chesed Yibane, that this world was created with the midah of Chesed. And that midah of Chesed, long before Avram Avinu was brought into the world and actually became a physical vessel for it through his own actions, that was already earmarked. That was already called Avram. Because those lofty midas are above time. And so it's not a question of, did Avram come into the world yet? That now the world could be created? No. The Avram Elyon exists. It exists forever. It exists unwrapped up into HaKadosh Baruch Hu's indivisible unity that expresses itself through these 10 midos. Ki haya v'yiyeh. Avraham bara Hashem yisbarach shamayim v'aretz. With that midah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth. And with this we'll finish. The Efsher Loimar, and with this we can understand Shezehu Pirish HaPasuk the Avraham zakein. This is what it means, Chevra, that Avraham was zakein, that Avram grew older. What does this mean? On a simple level, we're referring to the Avram HaTachton. We're referring to Avram Avinu, the historical personality, who at the end of his life grew old. Says the Maggid something very, very deep, and this needs a lot of focus. This is very, very deep. But this is, again, an excellent example of how the Hasidic masters took a simple pasuk and literally undressed it, and literally pulled away all the curtains so we're able to perceive the inner dimension, which is the title of this series. Listen to this. Kiloimar, what the Torah means to tell us, is that Avraham zakein, we're talking about the Midah Elyoina of Avram Avinu, the Bechina of Avram Elyon. Oisai Midah Hanikra Avram Elyon Shehu Zakein. This Midah of Avram Avinu, which is the Midah of Chesed, and we call it Avraham because that's the higher aspect, the Shorish Neshama of Avraham, for which Avram HaTachton, this actual historical personality, becomes a vessel for this Midah Elyoina of Avram Avinu. That Midah is very old. What does this mean, very old? You know why this is very old? Because the primary premise for the creation of the world, which is the very first ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did God want to create the world? Long before he even thought, which is Chachma and Bina, of how to go ahead and to bring the world into being, which takes place through the emotional midas of Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchus. Long before any of that, there was a ratzon. There was a rava in the Lashon of the Zohar Kodesh, a desire. And what was that desire? Olam chesed yibane. What does it mean that something is older than something else? It means that it's rooted in a period of time that began before the timeline of the second thing. What does it mean that I'm older than my youngest, a younger nephew or a cousin? What does this mean? It means that my timeline started in this world before his or hers did. Says the Maggid, once we understand that we're not talking about Avram HaTachton, but we're talking about Avram Elyon, so it doesn't just mean that Avram Avinu got old, but it means that the Midah Elyon of Avram Avinu is zakein. Because its timeline, in the sense of where it comes into play, in the developmental stages through which the world is brought into being through the Hey Motzaos HaPeh, spoken into existence, as we mentioned briefly, Avram zakein. It's the Midah of Chesed and Chesed Yibane that's rooted in a place deeper, and more shorashi and more essential than any other Midah. And he says another manifestation of this is Midah Chesed Sharsha Yehu Ba'atik, that the Midah of Chesed is rooted in a spiritual level that's called Atik, which is associated with Keser, without getting into the technicality of it, but that's associated with the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Chazal tell us, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to create the world? What's the Atik Yoimin? What does that mean? The ancient of days. Atik is Aramaic for ancient. What is this Midah of Atik Yoimin? And the answer is, you know what the Midah of Atik Yoimin is? It's the Midah of Chesed. It's the desire to do good. It's the desire to go ahead and to take every soul that's brought down into this world, and even those that go through a terrible, harrowing experience in this world, but we believe that everything's a kapara, and we believe that Gilgulim and all of these different processes and these different programs that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, embedded within the code of this existence is for the purpose, like the pasuk says, Ki lo yidach mimenu nidach, that there will be nobody lost. That at the end of the day, in the Yom Shekulei Purim, which the Arizal tells us is going to come after the Yom Shekulei Shabbos, which we refer to every single Shabbos in benching, and after the Yom Shekulei Yom Tov is the Yom Shekulei Purim, in that place of an ahapachu, in that place where Baruch Haman, everybody's mitukan, and that there's nobody that sits for eternal damnation. Ein mashu kazeh. There's no such thing in our theology. Everything's a tikkun. Even Gehenna is a tikkun. It's just a cleansing process so that you can then sit and enjoy your reward of Gan Eden. Not one thing is taken away, like the Talmud Devar discusses. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't come to torment us. He comes to build us up. He comes to rectify us, to gift us with the deepest and most beautiful, benevolent gift of all, which is a relationship with Him. And that's Atik. That's ancient. And you know what the Zohar Kodesh says about Atik, and with this we'll finish. Reishe, or Vesar Reishe, the hair. Again, metaphorically, obviously, we're talking about a place where there's no ein lo demus, ein lo tselem. But Besar Reshe, in a metaphoric sense, the hair on the head of this ancient of days, and the head of this ancient Midah is ketelek chivar, is like white snow. White, Chevra, is the color associated with the Midah of Chesed. White is associated with the way in which a person ages. Because the older that a person gets, listen to this, Chevra, it's the deepest sode of why our hair turns white when we grow old. Because the older we get, the more we're connected, bipnimius, to the concept of that which is old, that which is atik, that which is olam chesed gibana, that which is Avraham zakein. Memela, the older we get, which means that our timeline is rooted further back than most people on the planet, right? We're of the older segment of the population, so Memela, we're connected with the concept of white, we're connected with the concept of Atik Yoimin, which is God's earliest will for creation. We're connected with the concept of Chesed, and Chesed is white. And that's what the Pasuk is telling us here, Avram zakein. You can read it the opposite way also. Zakein, Avraham. The older a person gets, the more we're connected to the place of Avraham. The more connected we are to the concept of Chesed. And that's why Chazal tell us that by Har Sinai, our Kadosh Baruch Hu appeared like what? How did Hashem appear? In what form? Kizakein malei rachamim. Like an old person. But zakein also means zakan. It's a reference to the beard. It's a reference to Adras Panim, of the hair, of the white hair. Kizakein malei rachamim. Because this is how it goes. And it's mamish baduk u'menusa. By most people, by most healthy people, the older they get, the more they get softened. And the more they start to be able to have a feeling heart with that perspective that only age can give a person. After all of those experiences in life, after raising generations and seeing the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows and having that experience as their hair turns white, which is to most people just a scientific fact, but in the words and in the understanding of the Maggid hints to the deepest spiritual mitzias reality. The older they get and the whiter their hair turns, the more they become completely saturated and completely surrounded and imbued with the midah of the Avram zakein, of this midah of Chesed, of Atik Yoimin, whose hair is white. This way of being soft, kizakein malei rachamim, of having patience. Ki yadua, it's a known thing. Grandparents are far more benevolent to their grandchildren, right, and allowing than they are to their children, right? Everybody knows this. What's the pshat? Not just because they're their grandchildren, but the concept of grandchildren comes along with the concept of age usually. And as we grow older, with the perspective of the ages of generations, we become softer and we become kinder, and we have more time for people and more and we're able to see things in a deeper perspective, so that we don't get so angry for every small little detail. Yes, some older people get cranky also, but for the most part, in a healthy state, the elderly are much more genteel, right? They're much more gentle. They're much more able to look at things in a nuanced way, the Avraham zakein. And that is why an old person's hair, or an elderly person, or a person who is aging, is going to turn white. It's the sweetest, most beautiful thing. And that's exactly what the Pasuk tells us, Ateres Tiferes Seba. That old age is a crowning glory. It's the most beautiful thing, to be able to go ahead and to have that perspective, to embody this midah of Atik Yoim, this ancient midah, this midah of what we're talking about, this midah of Avram zakein. Lakach nikra zakein, and he says that's why it's called old. Oisai chesed and nikra Avram elyon shehu zakein. It's this midah of Avram Avinu. It's not Avram Avinu as his person who became old. That's also true, but there's a deeper spiritual mitzias to everything. And the pasuk is hinting us that Avraham zakein. What that means is that it's the upper lofty midah of Avram elyon, midas hachesed, that's associated with the concept of zakein. That's associated with the concept of the earliest premise for being, which was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's desire to create a world in order to manifest His goodness to us. The midah ba'atik yoimin, whose hair is white. Perish ba v'hislabesh ba'Avram Avinu. So he says this midah oisa chesed nikra Avram elyon shu zakein ba bayamim, and it is this midah of Avram zakein that's connected and associated with the earliest manifestation of godliness in the creative process, which is the midah of atik, which is the midah of desire, and that's how it works in any creative process. A person wants to build a house, you first have to have a desire to build a house. Then you think about how to go ahead building the house. You gather all the material together. And then you go ahead and bring that mikoach from potential to actuality. What's the very first step? is the desire, is the ratzon. That's even, I'm pointing to my head, but it's beyond the head. It's the crown. It's the keser. It's the crowning place that comes from beyond what my mind can grasp sometimes. Many people don't know why they want certain things. It's a desire that comes from a sharash neshama that's beyond the mind's capacity to understand. And just a cute remez, but I saw it brought down in Svarim this way, that this concept that people, when they either don't want to give an answer for something, or when they don't have a legitimate answer for something, but are adamant about something going a certain way in the Hebrew language, Israelis, it's one of their favorite words. It's in their top, the most commonly used words in Israeli society is the word kacha. Kacha. It is what it is, right? That's what it means. Kacha. Why did you go here today and at this time? Kacha. Is that a reason? Kacha is a reason? Because that's what it is? No, but the word kacha is Rosh Tevis Keser Kol Haksarim, the crown of all crowns, which is a reference to this midah of Atik Yomin, this Ateres Tiferes Seba, this crowning glory of the midah of Chesed that is associated with Ratzon. And that's what we mean when we say Kacha. Means, I can't articulate why, but it was something that was rooted in Keser Kol Haksarim, of Rava de Ravin, of Atik Yomin. And that's why I chose to do this specific thing. It's a nice remnant. So here we'll finish off with the last couple of minutes left. This earliest manifestation of godliness in the creative process, the Ratzon, to be Avram zakein, ultimately bayamim. It is that initial desire of a Kadosh Baruch Hu to bestow His goodness and to make it manifest and revealed before those who are going to live in a reality that they perceive themselves to have a separate consciousness from the source of their own consciousness. That's the Sod HaTzimtzum, is that we perceive that we're existing independent of that which is thinking us into being. And we think we're thinking independently, but we're only thinking because there's someone thinking about us that brings us into being, as the Baal Tanya describes in Sha'ar Yicha Ve'emuna, but that's the concealment, that's the Tzimtzum, and that's the Metzias. That aspect is bayamim. It is that premise. It is that deep and ancient raison d'etre, that earliest reason and premise for creation that is bayamim, that then comes and filters down into all the emotional traits that are indicative of the building blocks of creation physically going ahead to manifest God's dream. Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. And that's the way of understanding this pasuk. And Chaver, do I have to explain to you why, if we began teaching our children Torah on this level, Yiddishkeit would look completely different? Do I have to explain to you why, when we learn Torah in this way, all of a sudden something happens to my neshama where I don't just read a pasuk like the King James, like Lahavdil, like the translation, and Abraham was old and he came with days. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu had to give the Torah in Har Sinai, B'Kolus U'Brakim, to read that translation. The Avraham zakein, this midah of Atik Yomin, bayamim. It is that premise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves me, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us and desires to do good with us. That bayamim that brings the world into being. And in this way, we're able to go ahead and to look at a simple pasuk and to be able to hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love, and to be able to think deeply about the Creator and the creative process that He took and takes each and every moment to bring all of being into existence, so that when I leave this shiur, and so in a minute or two, and when I finish learning this piece inside the Tzaddik's writing, my perception of the world is different. My understanding of creation is deeper. All from one obscure pasuk that seems to just be the most simple thing in the world. Avram zakein, Avram got old, bayamim. But when we learn it through the prism of Pnimius, when we learn it through the prism of Chasidus, which is Hiktim Refuah Lamaka, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the remedy for all of the ailments, emotionally, spiritually, even physically, which is a manifestation oftentimes of the spiritual and emotional state of a person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Refuah, He gave us the remedy to learn Torah on this level, so that from every pasuk in the Torah, from every halacha, from every shakla v'tarya in a Gemara, we're able to perceive God's love. We're able to perceive and to strengthen a deeper understanding of our emunah, of our sharshei emunah, so that our children can understand that the Torah is amok, it's deep, every word is a remez, and every letter is hinting to the deeper secrets of the universe. Let's not just tell them, oh, trust me, there's deep things. Let's reveal it to them, because the neshamas are begging for it, and our souls are begging for it, and each and every one of us on this call are going ahead and feeding our neshama, and we should know that it's not a simple thing. It's a very, very unique, and it's a very wonderful thing, and our neshamas are thanking us for it, and we're the biggest recipients, and we're the ones that are really able to enjoy it on the deepest level, because we perceive the difference. We perceive the difference in the way that this kind of limud is able to bring us into Avodas Hashem in such a deep, deep way. And so let's just finish the last line over here. And again, Avram Avinu was zocheh to bring down that mid of Avram Elyon into the Avram HaTachton. And so now, and by the way, it's not just this pasuk that can be read this way. Anytime you're doing Shnai Mikra and you read a pasuk about Avraham, you have to think about it on both levels. This is also referring on a simple level to Avram HaTachton, the person Avram, but it's also referring to the Avram Elyon. And that's how you learn Panemius, by keeping both of these things in mind. And the Torah all of a sudden takes on a whole new mashma'ot, a whole new meaning. Okay, so with this we'll finish. I think that it's enough for now. If you want, again, I'm happy to send you the source sheets. You can finish the piece. But this is the primary idea. So the takeaway, first of all, is the necessity to engage with Limud Torah on this level, because it's amok, it's deep, and our neshamas are crying out for it, mamish crying out for it. But the takeaway also theologically and on an emunah level is to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world because He loves us. That's it. That's really the takeaway. To realize that if I had to answer on a whim and a person asked me, what is the very beginning of creation? What is the seed that is planted in the earth that ultimately is bayamim, ultimately sprouts up and becomes this glorious, beautiful tree of being? And the answer is ahava. The answer is chesed. The answer is Avraham zakein. It was the midah of Avraham, that Avram Elyon, that zakein bayamim, that long before God spoke creation into existence, it was rooted in the bechina of kol, of that infinite, lovely, beautiful niggin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that He loved us so much, and so He just had to create us in order to bestow His love upon us. And this is very, very, very important to understand, again, how a simple pasuk in the Torah is mamash telling us shorashei emunah, the deepest secrets of our faith. Be'ezras Hashem, I bless you and me, that we should be zocheh to truly understand these teachings, to truly understand how to learn Torah and to approach Torah in this way, to give ourselves the privilege of spending time each and every day. Pick a sefer, any sefer. There are so many options, and everything's been translated on every level, from Nesiva Shalom, to Tanya, to the Kutam Moran has now translated online. So many different options to be able to engage in the Torah in this way, so that when we walk away from every pasuk in the Torah, we're able to hear something so much deeper than just what the pasuk means on a simple level, and to be able to go ahead and to give this over to our children. That Yiddishkeit is not just deep because we said it's deep, but we're able to give them what their neshamas are yearning for, to prove it to them, to demonstrate it to them, to bring Yiddishkeit to life, to bring every pasuk into such a relevant term, so that I can cement my own theological understanding based on every single word in the Torah that we learn. And that's my blessing to all of us. I bless you that you should have an amazing rest of the week, a beautiful Shabbos. I want to thank our sponsor again for tonight's shiur, for making it possible, and for each and every one of you for joining with me. Ashreinu chevra, mamish ashreinu matayv chakenu. We could get up and dance from this. Avram zakein bayamim, in 4 words. It's the end of the world, right? It's the deepest, mamish the deepest. Ashreinu, thank you for sticking with me, and be'ezras Hashem, we should be zocheh to learn much, much, much more chasidus for many years. Happy, healthy years, and siyata d'shmaya. Thank you so much, each and every one of you, for joining. I appreciate it. Wishing you the most beautiful, beautiful Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, Chevra.